Mapagpalaya at mapanlabang umaga sa ating lahat. Sa araw na ito, nagkakatipon tayo upang manalangin, manawagan at hamunin ang bawat isa upang manawagan sa pagsulong. Forward na, pursue ICC investigation, prosecute Duterte. Ako si Patis Mungkal mula sa National Council of Churches in the Philippines at kaisa ako sa panawagang Stop the Killings.
Kaisa ako sa pagtataguyod ng karapatan at dignidad ng buhay. Ako si Father Richie Masagman ng Episcopal Church in the Philippines at ng Rise Up for Life and for Rights. Isa ako sa tinig ng panawagang Stop the Killings.
Kaisa kami. Victims are standing up to express their demand for President Rodrigo Duterte and others in his administration to be investigated for crimes against humanity of murder, torture, and other crimes in connection with the war on drugs.
We stand with them as church people, lawyers, human rights defenders, media practitioners, and others. Other crimes in connection with the war on drugs is not only in the best interest of victim families desiring justice, but also to the benefit of the entire country and humanity.
Let us start our event with a short liturgical meditation on the Stop the Killings Week with the theme, They Tried to Bury Us, They Didn't Know That We Are Seeds.
Internet pa natin.
Sisilong sa'yo, yayakapin ang landasing at bayan mo.
Poon mo ay aking ipagbubunyi at iibigin ang buong sarili.
Saan Makabalikat sa ating paglakbay, mananahan sa tahanan, sisilo sa'yo, ay ayakapin ang landasin at bayan mo. Huwag mong naisip, lisanin kita.
Nawa ay maging kaisa tayong lahat sa pagpapasya ng mga nanay, ng mga magulang, kaanak at mahal sa buhay ng lahat ng pinaslang ng administrasyong ito. Kaisa ako, forward na pursue ICC investigation.
At ang tungtungan ng ating pakikiisa at pagsulong ay sa ating pagtindig para sa karapatan, katarungan at dignidad ng buhay. Kaya ating padagundungin ang ating pakikiisa. Forward na prosecute Duterte. The widespread and systemic killings in the Philippines were and are instigated, incited, and facilitated through state policies. A preliminary investigation of these crimes under the purview of the ICC will surely ferret out needed evidence and information useful to a fruitful prosecution of perpetrators of crimes against humanity.
As we seek to overcome the climate of impunity that has gripped our country, we also seek to create, restore, foster, and strengthen the justice, democracy, and respect for human rights that our people deserve. We shall now be hearing messages coming from lawyer advocates and legal counsels. We shall be hearing from Attorney Neri Colmenares, the chairperson of National Union of People's Lawyers and also the lead counsel for Rise Up in the ICC. And we shall also be hearing from Dean Antonio Tony Lavinia, the convener of Manananggol Laban sa Extrajudicial Killings or Manlaban sa EJK.
Am I supposed to speak now?
Yes, Attorney.
Yes, okay, sige. Yes,
Thank
thank you. We human rights lawyers and human rights advocates express our support to the continuing quest for justice of all victims of human rights violations under President Duterte. We support the clamor of the families of the victims for the ICC to approve the recommendation of the prosecutor for the ICC to officially and formally open up a full-blown investigation so that President Duterte will be made to answer the charges of crimes against humanity filed against him by the families of the victims. President Duterte, it is really just for the families to go to the ICC. You see, there is no recourse here under President Duterte within our justice system. In fact, he claims presidential immunity here in the Philippines so that he cannot be prosecuted. He even declared publicly that he wants to run for the vice presidency because he has this absurd legal notion that he is immune from suit if he is the vice president of the Philippines. So clearly, the Philippine justice system is not only unwilling but unable to prosecute President Duterte. That is why we say that it is but proper for the victims to clamor for the opening of the investigation so that the course of justice can be continued in the ICC, and the opening of an investigation will help stem the tide of continuing human rights violations and extrajudicial killings that have engulfed the country under President Duterte. President Duterte is a hypocrite and a pretentious coward. He's a hypocrite because when the victims filed with the ICC, he says, why don't you file here in the Philippine courts? Because the justice system here is working. But the moment the families file their cases here, he will have these cases dismissed because he claims presidential immunity. Ginagago lang tayo eh. So President Duterte is a pretentious coward because after saying several times he is not afraid of going to prison, he is ready to go to prison. He now wants to run for the vice presidency because he wants to maintain his immunity. That means he's afraid of going to prison. It's not really true that he is not afraid of going to prison. He is scared of the ICC. Worse, what happens to his promises to his police and military subordinates that he will protect them, he will pardon them, he will grant them immunity when he himself cannot even ensure that he is immune from suit, or that he will not go to prison. So President Duterte actually made false promises not only to the Filipino people, but even to his henchmen from the police and the military who are his co-perpetrators in these extrajudicial killings. That is why we believe that the new president in the Philippines will make sure that President Duterte is held to account for his crimes, whether in the ICC or in our local courts. Definitely, as far as I'm concerned, President Duterte is going to prison after he steps down from his presidency. But let us unite in this, let us contribute in this unified effort to end the Duterte tyranny and dynasty, meaning to say that the victims and the human rights advocates are not only fighting for justice in the ICC, but also fighting for justice here by ensuring that in a unified effort that will end the tyranny and dynasty of President Duterte. We call on the Filipino people to unite in this momentous undertaking, to end the scourge that's haunted the Philippines and the Filipino people for years. We ask those who support President Duterte until now to please support this undertaking of the people to end this tyranny and dynasty, because it is the survival of the nation that is at stake here. We cannot exchange the future of we cannot sacrifice the future of our children and the next generation of Filipinos in exchange for our loyalties to a temporary president. So we reiterate our call that while we struggle for justice in the ICC, we continue to struggle for justice here, so that the Filipino people will be able to put an end to this tyranny. And President Duterte, just like many of the dictators and tyrants before him, will bite the dust. The day of reckoning is near for President Duterte. And through the unified efforts of the victims of human rights violations, the advocates for human rights, and the Filipino people, we will make sure that this tyranny and dynasty will end, and that President Duterte will get the justice that he so richly deserved, the punishment and accountability that he so richly deserved from the Filipino people. Maraming salamat po. Magandang umaga.
Maraming salamat po, Attorney Neri. And to add, maybe call on Dean Tony.
Thank you. Thank you, Patis, and thank you, Father, and thank you, Neri, for yung una mong, for the first intervention. I don't want to repeat what you said. I just want to echo that. So I will look at it from another point of view. First of all, in behalf of the manananggol laban sa extrajudicial killings, one of the first legal coalition groups that was created after the Duterte government took power and started killing our people and our poor, especially in the war against illegal drugs. We organize ourselves. We are lawyers, we are judges actually, we are law students that banded together to fight this crime against humanity, even as it was just beginning. No? So kasama nyo kami hanggang sa dulo at sa susunod na na antas, sa sunod na stage ng ganito ng ating paglaban dito, which we think will happen sa mas patas na mas patas na larangan, in a more even playing field, which is the International Criminal Court. Si Attorney Neri pointed out why we think that this case will be accepted. We'll go to the next stage of a full investigation of the crimes against humanity that President Duterte and other people has committed. We know that people have already been interviewed. We know that people have given their testimonies electronically. The lawyers of Rise Up, I know, has done that. I think other people have also done that. So that will now be accumulated and reviewed by the team. I know also that a strong team of lawyers and investigators have been put together by the International Criminal Court. And so they'll study that now. It's hard to predict when the decision of full investigation will happen. It can be anywhere from 3 months to a year, even more. We have to be patient. Because we also don't want this to be dictated by the same rules that the Duterte government has followed in killing many of our countrymen and country women, which is that there was no due process. So ironically, President Duterte and the others that can be implicated in this crime against humanity will be given due process at all stages of this proceeding. Once that is determined that there will be a full investigation, the pre-trial panel of the criminal court, the International Criminal Court, will then actually ask them to answer the charges, and it's up to them. Right now, they say they will not cooperate. Harry Roque said that the Duterte will not cooperate. Yun, sinabi nga ni Neri na duwag, no? Kasi after saying, charge me, and I will go to The Hague and do this, do that, hindi pa rin siya na magko-cooperate, di ba? It doesn't matter if they don't cooperate or not, because there are ways to continue the process even without the cooperation of the accused. Once that is determined that in fact there is evidence that the crimes have been committed, the crimes against humanity is committed, which I think, by the way, is not debatable. The killings have happened, we know that. The government themselves, di ba, mismong gobyerno natin ay nagpatunay nito, na umaamin nito na maraming namatay sa war against drugs. Ang dalawang excuse nila, either hindi kami ang gumawa noon or kung kami ang gumawa ng laban. That's where our comes from. Diba? It's a play of words against their excuse. Sa amin, manlaban means labanin namin yung mga nagsasabi na nanlaban yung mga pinatay. So the elements of the crimes against humanity is there. There's a systematic attack. People have been killed. There's an excuse that's given. I think that excuse does not hold any water. No, there's no such thing, and the rulings of the Supreme Court also about that. There's no such thing as presumption of regularity when you've killed someone. When you've killed someone, kailangan may investigation. And what we know is walang investigation nangyari dito sa mga karamihan ng mga nanlaban. So ang assumption doon, yung mga nanlaban ay actually unjustified and crimes against humanity. That's a dami nila. And so I have no doubt about that. I mean, there will be a question for sure about yung tinatawag na complementarity, whether or not we can hold them responsible here. But Attorney Colmenares is right, we cannot hold Duterte responsible because he invokes immunity from suit from that. I mean, and he's even running up for vice president, so he can falsely claim that he is immune. No? But I would even say that even the others that might be implicated, the generals that might be implicated, those that incited the killings, because it's not just the actual killing, it's also those who incited the killings that can be brought before the International Criminal Court. Even then, makita naman natin na na hindi natin sila na hold accountable. In a similar case, for example, that just came out from the ombudsman, we know that the journalist Marge Valle from Davao, who was wrongly arrested and filed charges against those who wrongly arrested her. With the ombudsman, na-dismiss lang siya on serious charges, ginawang simple negligence, no, kasi nagkamali lang daw sila. And so you can see that the system is not geared for protection. I mean, I do want to recognize, because we also have to recognize when the Supreme Court does the right things, that the Supreme Court did the right thing on the new rules for search and arrest warrants and has stopped the practice of judges issuing search and arrest warrants. Pero I think on the war against drugs, hindi pa natin siya and it's really mostly the executive branch anyway, and the police forces that has to be held into account for this. So yun, I think that the prospects of a trial in The Hague is good. Again, be patient. It can take a while. It might take a new government. Sa Sudan, finally, we know it was just announced the other day that Sudan will send their former president to The Hague for trial. No, after a few years na nagmatigas sila na hindi na. So justice always happens. No? I can assure you of that as a lawyer for a long time, as a philosophy teacher also, as a law professor. Justice always happens. It might take a while, but it does happen, and this will happen in this case. Thank you very much, and solidarity. Amping padayon sa inyong tanan.
To save the youth.
Duterte will kill to save the youth.
Look at
them.
Boys and young men cut down before their prime.
Tokhound.
Known as clever, studious,
mischievous, lovable,
And loving.
Joshua winning at Dota,
Kian preparing for his test.
Hard. Dreaming of an interior design career.
Kulot helping near his home.
Julius, another gamer, still missing. They were sacrificed on a demonic altar of misplaced discontent.
Were they quotas, bonuses, job security? Were they hardened criminals, lost causes, high-value targets of the drug trade?
They were teenagers who didn't fight back.
They were teenagers who didn't fight back.
they were teenagers who didn't fight back.
Teenagers who didn't fight back.
They were teenagers who didn't fight back.
Duterte will kill
And
kill
kill
and kill.
Maraming salamat, Rise Up, for that very powerful piece. Indeed, our call is to save the youth. Prosecute Duterte.
Tayong lahat ay maging kaisa sa panawagang pagsulong. Forward na, pursue ICC. Salamat din sa ating mga lawyers na patuloy na kikilakbay para igiit ang katarungan.
Ngayon, ating pakinggan Ang mga pananalita ng pakikiisa na magmumula sa iba't ibang personalidad na kasama natin sa pagsusulong ng katarungan.
Atin pong mapapakinggan si Miss Inday Barona, ang isang mensahe mula sa office ni Senator Laila de Lima at saka mula kay Congressman Sara Ilago.
I'm Inday Espina Varona, journalist. I have covered the families of victims of Rodrigo Duterte's so-called war on drugs, which has killed thousands, but has not solved the problem that gave birth to this carnage. They are real people, not just numbers on a computer screen. Duterte peddles the lie that all this blood was shed on behalf of the security of our people and the future of our children. And he has also harped on an even greater lie, that all those who have been killed deserved it because they fought back. In many cases, families and other witnesses have said the victims were killed while on their knees, bleeding, or prone on the ground, still bleeding. Nobody believes anymore in the nanlaban fiction. Majority of Filipinos say that they fear falling victim to extrajudicial killings. The number of unofficial killings, the shootings by so-called vigilante groups, are thrice that of what has been recorded during official operations. And yet, in several cases, the so-called vigilantes have turned out to be cops or individuals and groups linked to cops. We all believe drugs are a serious menace, but that is no excuse for snuffing out lives without due process. Let us not forget the many children who have fallen to Duterte's bloodlust. Let us not forget that for every parent killed, children suffer. As a journalist and a citizen of the Philippines, I join the fight to rise for life and rights, which Duterte had tried to take away from us from day one of his rule. Tokhang forced people to surrender even with no charges lodged against them. It was either surrender or face the barrel of a gun. But even those who surrendered in good faith, including those who had tried to turn their lives around, were still killed. And these killings were on the orders of Duterte. There are enough public documents, public videos that show how he has egged on state forces to do his bidding. In fact, he has actually threatened and punished people in government who tried to stand between his brutal orders and the citizens of our country. The Duterte regime stonewalled and continues trying to block the justice sought for by his victims' families. He continues to call human rights advocates as enemies of the state. For the families of the fallen, just getting the basic documents on their killings required a fight that ended up all the way in the Supreme Court. I support bringing this fight for justice to the International Criminal Court. I hope the ICC can pursue its investigation into Duterte's drug war and later persecute him and his minions. But we cannot solely pin our hopes on the ICC. I know people still continue to live in fear, but I urge you, join the fight for human rights. Join the battle to hold leaders accountable for the abuses of the last 5.5 years. Let us support the families that have risked so much to get justice for their loved ones. Let us all together rise and with a great roar demand, stop the killings.
Solidarity message for the call to stop the killings in the Philippines, remembering the human rights victims. Today, I join Rise Up for Life and for Rights, the National Union of People's Lawyers, and various human rights groups and families of EJK and red tagging victims in demanding justice for their loved ones and for the atrocities perpetrated under the killing machinery of the drug war and the anti-terror law, both under the Duterte administration. Ang Agosto ay buwan ng kasaysayan sa buong bansa. Ngunit sa buwang ito rin nangyari ang ilan sa mga karumaldumal na pagpaslang, Randall Carande Echanis at Zara Alvarez. Sila ay walang anumang koneksyon sa droga. Karaniwang estudyante, nagsusulong ng karapatang pantao, nagtataguyod ng kapayapaan, ngunit sila ay pinatay sa ngalan ng war on drugs at maling akala. Let us etch in history and the memory of the nation henceforth as part of remembering in buwan ng kasaysayan all of them and the thousands of victims of killings and human rights abuses orchestrated by Rodrigo Duterte, 16th President and mass murderer. At mula rito, mariin nating ipanawagan na itigil ang pagpatay. Imbestigahan si Duterte, papanagutin ang mga may sala sa mga patayan at pag-abuso. We want the human rights of the Filipino people to be respected. Standing for accountability on Duterte's drug war, count me in. Forward na. May Lagda, Laila M. De Lima, PNP Custodial Center, Camp Crame, August 14, 2021. Salamat po.
We remember Kian, Carl, Kulot, Joshua, Julius, and all victims of extrajudicial killings. We must never forget. We continue to seek justice. We cannot allow the children and the youth to grow up thinking that due process can just be ignored, that human rights can be violated without accountability, and that this criminal and tyrannical rule has a place in our society. We remember Karandi, Zara, and all victims of extrajudicial killings. We must never forget. We continue to seek justice. We, the people, cannot allow ourselves to think that we hold no power to collectively respond to this rights emergency and stand up for justice and human dignity. With principled unity and solidarity, we can make it. We are brought together by our rage at how drug war killings continue. Attacks against human rights defenders, trade unionists, advocates, critics, and dissenters have also intensified. The Duterte regime continues to use police and military stockholm-style operations to target innocent civilians. Billions and billions of taxpayers' money and resources are being spent on this murderous rampage, while millions are deprived of food relief, urgent cash aid, wage subsidies, and substantial funding for health and education. The masses are suffering from the administration's failed pandemic response, snail-paced back, never-ending burst. We share the rage against negligence, corruption, incompetence, and injustice. But we also share the dream of changing this dire situation for the better. We have turned our seething rage into organized action. We have come together to speak with one voice, and we need more to join us in demanding that the killings must stop. Duterte's reign of terror, tyranny, and impunity must end. Youth and students standing with and alongside the people in opposition to drug war killings, corruption, abuse of power, attacks on press freedom, and the railroading of the terror law are increasingly being targeted and singled out through threats and harassment, against outspoken youth and student leaders and their organizations, and even this youth representation. The attacks we face as a critical and progressive youth representation are also faced by human rights defenders, journalists, and activists. Clearly, these are all part of a broader attempt to silence all critical voices and remove all forms of accountability. And so, in the face of escalating attacks against the youth and the people, we vow to rely on our collective power and never allowed ourselves to be cowered into silence. Mga kabataan, mga kababayan, it's time to raise our voices stronger and louder than ever before. Together, let us call, stop the killings. We in Kabataan Party List stand in solidarity with you in amplifying this call and carrying on the fight for justice for all victims of killings, abuses, and violations of human rights in the Duterte regime's bloody drug war and brutal crackdown on dissent and activism. The perpetrators of these killings and attacks, along with their protectors, should be held accountable and punished. We join the call for ICC and the UN Human Rights Council to conduct impartial and independent probes into the human rights crisis in the country and to prosecute President Duterte and his cohorts for their crimes against the Filipino people. Never forget why we fight. We fight to stop the killings. We fight to stop the attacks. And for the youth, the stakes are high. We are fighting for survival. We must also remember that our persistence and commitment in seeking the truth and standing up for our rights have always brought us closer and closer to attaining justice and exacting accountability. In continuing the fight for our collective aspiration for a more equal and just society, there is hope. May pag-asa.
Mula naman sa iba't ibang advocacy groups na nagbibigay ng iba't ibang suporta at serbisyo para sa mga pamilya ng pinaslang sa war on drugs.
Sa higit na 5 taon ng Administrasyong Duterte, libo-libo na mula sa mga mahihirap na Pilipino ang nawalan ng mahal sa buhay, pinagkaitan ng hustisya, patuloy na bumabangon mula sa banta ng kagutuman at lalo't pinaigting pa ng pandemya, at patuloy na mabuhay sa takot at pangamba dahil sa walang katapusang digmaan kontra droga, na hindi naman talaga inilalatag ang tunay na solusyon. Kami, mula sa Respond and Break the Silence Against the Killings, ay kaisa sa panawagang ipagpatuloy ang investigasyon ng International Criminal Court sa Pilipinas at panagutin ng rehimeng Duterte. Hindi kailanman pagpaslang ng buhay ng mga tao ang kapalit ng paghahangad ng kapayapaan, kundi pakikinig sa hikbi at sigaw ng mga maralita at pisante. Tigilan ang pamamaslang, panagutin ang rehimeng Duterte.
Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Ako po si Marita Wasan. Ako po ay isang lingkod ng simbahan at ako din po ay kasapi sa samahan ng bawat isa mahalaga. Naniniwala po ako na ang buhay ng tao ay napaka-valuable sapagkat ginawa tayo ng Diyos, nakawangis niya at katulad niya. Alam ko na maraming mga Pilipino na sangkot at that is what they claim. Nasangkot sila sa droga at ito ay taliwas sa unang-unang adikain ng Pangulong Duterte. Pero dahil ako ay isang lingkod ng simbahan na pininiwala ako na ang bawat buhay ay mahalaga, dapat nating pangalagaan at bigyan ng masusing pagtulong kung ang isang tao ay may kasalanan at hindi lamang ito sadyang pinapatay. Napakarami na po. Hindi lamang po daan, kundi libo ang mga mahihirap na pinatay ng dahil lamang sa droga. Nakikiusap po ako sa International Criminal Court ng ICC na litisin ang mga taong sangkot sa mga criminal acts na ginagawa ng mga taong nagpapanggap na sila ay batas. Hindi po yan ang batas ng Diyos. Wala po yan. At wala din po yan sa batas ng tao. Hihilingin ko po ang katarungan para sa kanila. Lalong-lalo na po dun sa mga naulila, sa mga pamilya, sa mga komunidad na puspos ng takot dahil sa mga patayang walang saysay, puros karahasan. Hindi po ito ang nararapat para sa bawat Pilipino. Mahalin po natin ang bawat isa sa pamamagitan ng pagtulong. At ito pong ginagawa ko ay tulong para sa mga sawing palad na namatay dahil sa droga. Maraming salamat po.
Tay, bakit ako binaril ng pulis? Tinig ni Aldrin. May test pa po ako bukas. Huwag ko po sana maging pulis. Tinig ni Micah. Mga munting tinig ng mga bata, mga musmus, ngunit pinatahimik sa ilang putok ng mga baril ng mga pulis dahil sa isang utos ng isang presidente. Mahigit 5 taon na po ang walang habas na patayan sa ating bayan. Mahigit 5 taon na rin po ang pagsasantabi ng karapatang pangtao. Mahigit 5 taon na rin po ang mapagbalahurang pananalita na siya nagpapalaganap ng kulturang kasinungalingan sa ating bayan. They tried to bury us. They didn't know that we are seeds. Sinubukan nilang ilibing ang katotohanan. Hindi nila alam ang kanilang ibinaon ay hindi lang buto, kung hindi mga binhi rin. Tayo ang mga binhi na mamumunga ng pananampalatayang magbibigay ng buhay. Tayo ang mga binhi na mamumunga at maghahandog ng pag-asa. Pag-asang magpapahalaga sa buhay at sa susunod na henerasyon. Tayo ang mga binhi na maghahandog ng tuwan sa tamang daan at marangal na daan at higit sa lahat sa pagpapahalaga at pag-asenso ng buhay na may takot sa Diyos. We demand systematic killings that has continued to kill lives and has left hundreds if not thousands widowed and orphaned. And all these killings came about by one person's order, by Mr. Duterte's order to kill, and to kill. Sobra na, tama na, wakasan na. I joined the quest of the brave Filipino souls I join this demand for accountability. Accountability for the lives that were murdered, accountability for the millions and billions of pesos spent, all for the name of the failed war on drugs. Count me in. We move forward. We move forward with God. We move forward together and demand the stop of the killings and start the healing.
Nakikiisa ang pamilyang Lasaliano, ang sektor ng mga guro at mga nagpapatakbo ng mga paaralan sa Pilipinas. Sa ating panawagan, stop the killings. Simula po ng administrasyon ni Pangulong Duterte, hindi po napapatid ang libu-libong mga kababayan natin, ang mga mahihirap, sa kanyang war on drugs. Sa tukhang na kanyang iniatas sa ating mga kapulisan. Kagaya po ng maraming mga sinasabi ng marami sa atin, ang akala ng ating administrasyon ay kanila nang inilibing ang kanilang mga pinatay. Mabuti nga kung inilibing ng maayos. Ang kanilang nakalimutan, ang tinig ng mga maralita ay patuloy ay hindi mga patay. Sila ay mga buto na muling susuloy at magbabanta ng panibagong buhay. Sa dami-dami ng mga nabalo, naulila, nawalan ng padre de pamilya, ng mga mangangalaga sa kanila, ang war on drugs ang isa sa pinakamahalagang issue na kailangan nating mulit-muling balikan. Hindi po natin ito kailangang makalimutan. Kailangan nating panagutin. Hindi lamang ang Pangulo, kundi pati ang lahat ng mga nagpursigi para kitilin ang kalayaan, ang buhay, lalong-lalo na ng mga mahihirap. Sa ICC, kailangan po nating suportahan ang lahat ng mga tumutulong para maisulong ang isyong ito sa International Court. Dito po sa lokal, kailangan nating tulungan ang lahat ng ating mga kababayan na humihingi ng hustisya para sa kanilang mga nawala sa buhay. Lahat ng mga nabalo at naulila ay kailangan nating tulungan para muli silang makabangon sa kanilang mga pangangailangan at makapag-umpisa ng panibagong buhay. Ang simbahan, ang sektor ng mga guro, ang pamilyang Lasaliano ay nakikiisa sa panawagan, itigil ang pagpatay sa ating mga kababayan, panagutin ang mga dapat kasama sa International Criminal Court at pigilin ang panibagong liderato na mamuno at isama sa halalan 2022. Sabay-sabay po, kasama namin kayong lahat sa panalangin at sa aksyon para mapanibago ang ating bayang Pilipinas. Maraming salamat po.
Maala-ala mo pa kaya? December 30, 2016, the headline of Inquirer, Hunt for Drug Suspect leaves 7 dead. 7 people, including 3 men, looking for a drug suspect in 3 teenagers were Jonel Segovia, 15 years old, Sonny Espinosa, 16 years old, Angelito Soriano, 16 years old. Pinatay nila ang aming mga anak. Inosente sila. Wala silang kasalanan. The mothers of these boys told Inquirer. Maala-ala mo pa kaya? December 2016, Mr. Rodrigo Roa Duterte was 5 months President of the Philippines. From 2016 till now, 2021, killings are still happening. Pagkatapos ng massacre sa Bagong Silang, marami pang sumunod na mga kabataang pinatay. Joshua Laksamana, Julius Sebastian, still missing, Kian de los Santos, Carl Arnaiz, Reynaldo Colot de Guzman, and there are more, and there are more. A friend of mine asked, were they hardened criminals? Were they high-value targets of drug trade? No, they were not all of this. They were teenagers who did not fight back. They were teenagers who did not fight back. What kind of society is this, allowing your youth to be killed? Are we not hurt seeing sa mga patayang nangyayari? Hanggang kailan natin pababayaan na dumanak ang dugo ng banal na buhay ng ating mga kabataan? Panginoon, maawa ka sa amin. Panginoon, maawa ka sa amin. Sobra na, tama na. Stop the killings.
Pagsasamantala, tayo'y makikibagan hanggang sa tagumpay, hanggang sa paglaya, hanggang sa huling hininga, hanggang sa huling pagbagsak ng ating katawan. Magpapatuloy ang paninindigan, pabangon ng sambayanan, hanggat may pang-aapi at pagsasamantala, tayo'y makikibagan hanggang sa tagumpay, hanggang sa paglaya, hanggang sa huling hininga. Hanggang sa huli, hanggang sa huli, hanggang sa huli, hanggang sa huli.
Thank you for that very powerful song, Father Chris of Iglesia Filipina Independiente. Tunay ngang ang ating pakikiisa at mga panawagan ay hindi lamang nakakahon sa isang forma.
Tama ka dyan, Patis. We can all express our solidarity in our calls in many forms. Hindi magiging hadlang ang militaristang lockdown na ito para sa ating mga pakikiisa at pagpapaabot ng panawagan. Kaya tuloy-tuloy tayo. Salamat sa lahat ng mensahe na ating narinig mula sa mga kasamahan nating nasa iba't ibang organisasyon.
Kaisa kami, forward na to the investigation of the ICC, sulong.
Sulong. And now, let us hear from our international partners who are also raising their voices to support our call, Stop the Killings.
I'm Pearl Wong from Kowloon Union Church and Queer Theology Academy, Hong Kong. Stop the killing. As church leaders, we will continue to speak for truth and support families seeking justice. When I visited Philippines a few years ago, through the arrangement of Rise Up, I was able to meet with the parents whose children are unjustly killed. Their stories touched me very much, and from then on, I am a keen supporter of this campaign. We want the human rights for the Filipino people to be respected, standing for accountability on Duterte's drug war. Count me in. Forward.
Greetings of Solidarity. Ako po si Deaconess Joy Prem mula sa California Pacific Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, USA, serving now in Hong Kong on assignment with mga overseas Filipino workers. I am proud to follow in the footsteps of the generations of my foremother deaconesses in serving in communities pushed to the margins by our society. As a church leader called to ministries of justice and compassion, I stand in solidarity with the nanays and families who have lost loved ones to Duterte's so-called war on drugs, which is really a war against the poor. I have met the nanays multiple times over the past 4 years, have heard their testimonies in their homes and churches in Manila and Quezon City, shared food and tears together. Their courage to continue on fighting for justice is truly inspiring. As a church leader, we must stand with those forgotten by society to support them as they fight for justice and find their voices to speak out. It's in following in this calling and in Jesus' footsteps that I join with the nanays in calling for the advancement of the case at the International Criminal Court. We want the human rights for the Filipino people to be respected. Standing for accountability on Duterte's drug war. Count me in. Forward na. Stop the killings now. Long live international solidarity.
Last year, Global Witness published a report revealing that the Philippines is the second world's deadliest country for environmental and human rights defenders. These killings include the murders of indigenous peoples opposing illegal mining and plantations, asserting their right to self-determination, and protecting their ancestral lands from those seeking to exploit their natural resources. In 2019, the Philippines was the country with the most mining-related deaths. Globally, the Philippines has been consistently named as one of the worst places for attacks against defenders. Under the Duterte regime, activists have faced threats and dangers in protecting communities and ecosystems against environmentally destructive projects. And extrajudicial killings have been rising dramatically. Since the beginning of the pandemic, the killings have increased by 50%. I stand in solidarity with and add my voice to the voices of many church people in the Philippines and around the world, demanding a stop to the killings in the Philippines and calling upon the International Criminal Court to grant the prosecutor's request for an investigation into the killings and to bring justice to those responsible for the violations of the right to life. We want human rights for the Filipino people to be respected. We stand for accountability on Duterte's drug war and other human rights abuses. Count me in. Forward na.
We will also hear different groups standing in solidarity with the families.
My name
and
is Reverend
victims
Sadie
of the
Stone.
drug war.
I'm a United Methodist pastor and the Deputy Secretary of ICHRP Global Council. Today, I join my voice in demanding justice and accountability for the human rights violations, standing in solidarity with the victims of those who have been killed under the Duterte administration. In 2018, I was able to spend time with Rise Up and go out into the communities that have been most directly impacted by the so-called war on drugs. I heard the stories directly from the mothers and the wives and the sisters and the children who have lost loved ones, whose loved ones were murdered sometimes in front of their very own eyes in their own homes. These family members are now left. So-called war on drugs is nothing more than a war on the poor, and as a church leader, I join my voice with all of the others that are demanding that these stories be told and the families seeking justice are heard and that justice is received. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells us that he came so that we might live and live life abundantly. And under the current Duterte administration, basic human rights and freedoms are stripped away, and murder is actively encouraged with impunity. My faith is a faith that stands with those on the margins, that says that the last shall be first, and demands a disruption of this current status quo that continues to allow for thousands and thousands of vulnerable people to be murdered. My faith demands not only prayer, but action and speaking out. And I stand in solidarity with all of those people here and abroad and in the Philippines and all over who refuse to give in to the injustices of the Duterte administration. We demand human rights for the Filipino people to be respected. We demand accountability for Duterte's drug war. Count me in. Forward na. Prosecute Duterte. Wakasan na. Stop the killings. Amen.
Okay, apologies for that. Now we will hear different groups standing in solidarity with the families and victims of the drug war. We have here Defend Negros, Bayang Matulungin, and Karapatan.
Magandang araw po sa lahat na dumalo sa poro na ito. In behalf sa Defend Negros at National Federation of Sugar Workers, kami mahigpit na nakikipagkaisa sa lahat ng biktima ng karahasan laban sa pulisiya ng pamamaslang ng Administrasyong Duterte. Ang tinamong eksperyensya ng matinding takot at trauma sa pagkawala ng mga mahal sa buhay ng biktima ng war on drugs ay ramdam namin dahil sa aming direktang karanasan sa political killings na nangyari at patuloy na nangyayari dito sa isla ng Negros. Dito sa Negros, umabot na sa mahigit 100 ang minasakir at pinatay na mga kasamahan namin na mga cause-oriented groups. Hindi ilingid sa atin ang nangyari sa Sagay 9 Massacre, Negros 6 at Negros 14 at marami pang iba. Sa mga pinatay, mahigit 6 na po ay mga magsasaka at manggagawa na tumindig lamang sa kanilang karapatan sa makabubuhay na sahod at lupang sakahan para sa kanilang pamilya. Mga simpleng pangarap sa buhay na sadyang ipinagkait ng mga makapangyarihan ng kasalukuyang gobyerno. Isa din po ako sa daan-daang sinampahan ng gawa-gawang kaso ng rehimeng Duterte sa Negros na ang tanging kasalanan lamang ay tumindig sa karapatan ng mamamayan at para sa matiwasay at maayos na pamumuhay. Masakit ang mawala ng mahal sa buhay, pero walang kasing sakit ang mawala ng mahal sa buhay sa kamay ng nagkukunwaring gobyerno na nagsasabing ginagawa nila ang pamamaslang para daw sa kapayapaan at kaunlaran ng ating mamamayan. Ang argumentong ito ng kasalukuyang gobyerno ay kabaliktaran at tahasang panlilinlang sa mamamayan dahil ang mga pagpatay ng ating mahal sa buhay ay nagsadlak sa atin sa mas matinding kahirapan, pagkaulila ng maraming kabataan at walang tigil na karahasan sa ating bayan. Kami mahigpit na sumusuporta sa malakas na panawagan sa International Criminal Court na masimula na ang malawakang investigasyon sa kriminal na pamamahala ng gobyernong Duterte. Kami mahigpit na nakikipagkaisa sa lahat ng biktima ng pamamaslang at karahasan na ginagawa nito para makamit ang tunay na hustisya. Nananawagan kami na irespeto ang karapatang pantao ng mamamayang Pilipino. Magpalakas at magpalawak tayo at patuloy na lumaban para mapanagot ang isang mamamatay tao at immoral na gobyerno ni Duterte. Kapit-bisig po tayo sa ating lahat at padayon.
Kami mula sa bayang matulungin na naghahatid ng serbisyo sa kapwa naming mahihirap ay nakikiisa at sumusuporta sa panawagan ng hustisya para sa mga kababayan natin na biktima sa pekengerang kontra droga. Patid namin ang pekengerang ito ay labis na nagpahirap sa mga dukha, kapari sa mga kababayan natin na aming pinagsisilbihan sa pamamagitan ng mga community kitchen. Nananawagan kami sa hanay ng mga nasa taong simbahan na patuloy na tulungan at suportahan ang mga biktima at kanilang pamilya para makamit ang hustisya. Magsama-sama tayo mga nagmamahal sa buhay at kapayapaan sa panawagan ng Duterte at patayan ay mawakasan na. Hustisya sa lahat ng biktima ng pamamaslang.
Hindi kami titigil hanggat hindi nakakamit ang hustisya. Ito ang mga iwinika ng mga nanay, tatay, lolo't lola, kapatid, anak, kamag-anak ng mga biktima ng madugong gera kontra droga. Kung silang mga nakaranas ng malulupit at masasakit na karanasan, ay nananatiling matatag at hindi napapagod o natatakot para ipaglaban ang hustisya, tayo ay hinahamon ng panahon para makiramay, para tumindig, para kumilos. Libo ang itinuring na mga hayop, collateral damage, kaaway ng Estado o mga salot sa lipunan. Tinaniman ng droga, baril, bala at cardboard at binawian ng buhay ng isang gobyerno na nais maghasik ng takot para makapaghari. Pinaikot-ikot ang mga kaanak sa pagkuha ng police report, medico-legal report at kung ano-anong report. Ngunit sa bandang huli ay itinuring lamang na statistika ng achievements na ibinabandera kapag State of the Nation address o kapag nasusukol sa pananagutan. Naglikha pa raw ng review panel, ngunit halos 2 taon mula nang ipinangako ang paglabas ng di umano'y independent probe, walang nakukulong na malaking opisyal na harap-harapan at lansakang nag-utos ng mga pamamaslang. Samantala, ang mga kaanak ng mga biktima ay nag-aapuhap ng hustisya. Naghahabla sa korte o sa ombudsman, ngunit tila mailap pa rin ang hustisyang ito. Tinatakot ang mga kaanak at witness, binabalot ng mga babala ang mga komunidad at sinisira ang social solidarity ng mga tao sa komunidad. Patuloy ang pagyayabang ng mga katawang nabuwal bilang mga tropeyo ng gera kontra droga. Patuloy ang pananawagan ng pagpaslang. Patuloy na kinukutya at pinagtatawanan ng mga nasa pamahalaan at ng mga tagapamandila nito ang mga hakbang para mailatag ang pananagutan. Ang mga nananawagan ng katarungan, tulad ng mga human rights groups at ni Senator Laila de Lima, ay kinukulong, pinapatay o patuloy na pinagbabantaan. Which is why the International Criminal Court's decision for justice and accountability, which is not merely to establish who are accountable, but it should also pave the way for reckoning, for reparations for victims and families, for non-repetition of these heinous crimes. We in Karapatan support victims, their families, and communities in this long, arduous, and yet inspiring journey and struggle for justice and accountability. We will not relent until the masterminds and perpetrators are held to account. We will not relent until this regime is made to answer for its crimes.
Once again, we thank our local and international partners in resounding the call for justice and peace here in the Philippines. Inaanyayahan din natin ang lahat ng ating kababayan na nakasubaybay sa atin ngayon through Facebook Live. Samahan po ninyo kami.
Sama-sama po tayong manawagan para sa hustisya para sa lahat ng pinaslang sa Duterte drug war na ito. Para sa patuloy na panawagan at call to action, let us listen to Sister Mary John Mananzan, Junior of the CBCP, Episcopal Commission on Social Action and Justice and Peace, nasa Caritas Philippines, Bishop Emergencio Padillo of the United Church of Christ in the Philippines, Bishop Reuel Norman Marigsa of the National Council of Churches in the Philippines, and Deaconess Rubilin Litao of Rise Up for Life and for Rights.
I join the indignant voices shouting, "Stop the killings." It is so sad that there is a loss of respect for life in our society today. That the solution of the president to problems is kill, kill, kill. Patayin, patayin, patayin. There is now a culture of death in our land, and the victims of this AJ case are crying out for justice. I welcome the investigation of the ICC. The sins against humanity perpetrated in our society in this administration have to stop, and the perpetrators must be given their just punishment. So once again, I join the call. Stop the killings. Stop the killings now. Thank you very much.
Ang Simbahang Iglesia Filipina Independiente ay sumasampalataya at sumasamba sa isang Diyos ng katarungan at kapayapaan. At aming misyon ay pahayag ng nasabing Diyos sa katauhan ng Kristo Jesus na nagpakilala sa banal na kasulatan na siya nga ang katotohanan at ang buhay. Bunsod ng pananampalatayang ito, ako bilang Obispo Maximo ng Iglesia Filipina Independiente ay nakikiisa sa mga tinig at panawagan mula sa maraming sektor ng ating lipunan na kondenahin ang pamamaslang na nangyayari sa ating lipunan na tinatangkilik ng gobyerno ni Pangulong Duterte sa pamamagitan ng kanyang war against drugs and war against terrorism. Ang mga pamamaslang na ito ay state-sponsored. Simula nang umupo si Pangulong Duterte noong 2016 at kumitil ng maraming inosenteng buhay mula sa hanay ng mga maghihirap at batayang masa, sa mga tinataguriang mga peace consultants at peace advocates, at sa mga human rights defenders at environmental activists. We demand that President Duterte and his government be made accountable for this massive loss of lives among the Filipino people. Ako po ay nagagala na nagsisimula nang gumugulong ang proseso ng hustisya sa International Criminal Court upang papanagutin si Pangulong Duterte sa kahindik-hindik na krimen na ginawa ng kanyang pamahalaan laban sa sangkatauhan at laban sa dignidad ng buhay ng tao. To make President Duterte and his government be accountable for these horrendous killings will finally give justice to the victims and to their relatives. strengthen the spirit and morale of the Filipino people, and restore respect and integrity to our country among the international community of nations. Ang pagkakamit ng katarungan ay muling magpapatunay na tayo nga sa Pilipinas ay isang Kristiyanong bansa na nagpapairal ng katotohanan, ng buhay at ng kapayapaan ayon sa katuruan ng ating Panginoong Hesus.
Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Bilang isa sa mga leader ng ating simbahan, ako ay nananawagan sa pamahalaan sa pamumuno ng ating Pangulo Rodrigo Duterte na kumilos para wakasan na ang mga hindi nalulutas na maramihang pagpatay. Kasabay din po dito ang laganap na red tagging sa mga people's organization, ilang politiko at maging mga simbahan na critical sa mga policy ng pamahalaan. Ang pagpuna po ay bahagi ng democratic processes at karapatan ng mga mamamayan at hindi dapat magbunga ito ng pangamba, takot at panganib. Ang pagkakait nito ay magbubunga lalo lamang ng hindi pagkakaunawaan at karahasan sa ating bayan at magiging mailap ang paghahanap natin ng kapayapaan at kasaganaan. Bilang Kristiyanong sambayanan, hinihiling kong bumalik ang pamahalaan sa hapag ng pakikipag-usap para sa kapayapaan at pagkakaisa. Handang makipagtulungan ang United Church of Christ in the Philippines upang suportahan ito para sa pangmatagalang kapayapaan. Pagpalain nawa tayo ng Diyos.
As church, we believe in the sacredness of life because this is a gift from God. And we also believe that we are stewards of this life. So we call on all our workers in the Social Action Network to stand, to support, and to protect this life. We call on everybody to stand in pursuing accountability for the extrajudicial killings and other violations of human rights under this drug war of the present administration. Count me.
And to stand with those orphans and widows. The prophet Isaiah was quoted by Jesus in what is known as his mission statement in Luke chapter 4. That mission which he handed to his disciples and to the followers, as well as to the church, is to preach the good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives and release to those in prison. Thus, the church cannot escape from standing for justice and walk alongside those who suffer from injustice. The church, if it is to become a salt of the earth and light of the world, must speak for truth without fear. It is for this reason that we in the church and in the ecumenical movement commit ourselves to be with the families in seeking justice for those who have fallen and died due to the questionable drug war, as it targeted the poor and not the source of the drugs, like the syndicates and their protectors in government. We should consistently press government to respect human rights and uphold human dignity, as well as the rule of law. With so many killed and the admission that such a brutal approach has not made a dent, much less stopped the drug war, we support the investigation and prosecution. Things must stop.
Madugo ang buwan ng Agosto sa bawat taon ng killer na Pangulo. Lumipas ang mga buwan at taon dahil sa bigong gera kontra droga. Paralit ng komunidad ang resulta ng palpak at bigong war on drugs ni Pangulong Duterte. Hanggang ang sistemang umiiral ay nakatuntong sa pundasyon ng eksploitasyon at opresyon, hanggang ang istruktura ng lipunan ay panig sa mga makapangyarihan, milyong dukha ang magugutom, maghihirap at kakapusin na magkaroon ng akses sa batayan at serbisyong panlipunan. Tinanggalan ng mga dukha sa karapatang pang-ekonomiya. Walang hanap buhay at walang nakasasapat na sahod. Kaya hindi rin sila Sa bawat taon na walang humpay na patayan, isa-isang tumitindig ang mga pamilya ng biktima, lalo na ang mga nanay na nawalan ng anak at asawa. Nagkaroon ng mukha, pangalan at pangarap ang mga pinaslang na pilit na ginagawang istatistika na lamang sa paningin ng sangkot sa mga patayan. Panagutin at usigin si Pangulong Duterte ang mensahe ng mga pamilya ng biktima. Ito rin ang mensahe ng mga taong simbahan, mga organisasyon at mga individual na nagtataguyod ng karapatan ng mamamayan. Sa patuloy na paghahanap ng hustisya, ang mga pamilya ng biktima ng war on drugs, kasama ang Rise Up at National Union of People's Lawyers, ay lumahok sa paanyaya ng International Criminal Court na magpahayag ng pagsang-ayon upang maimbestigahan ang krimen ng gobyernong Duterte sa malaganap na pagpaslang at paglabag sa karapatan ng mamamayan kaugnay ng polisiya ng war on drugs. Patuloy na nagsisikap ang mga pamilya ng biktima upang makamit ang hustisya labas sa Korte ng Pilipinas. Hindi matatakasan ni Pangulong Duterte ang kanyang pananagutan sa kanyang krimen laban sa mamamayan. Ating biguin ang pakanan ng pamilyang Duterte na manatili sa poder ng kapangyarihan. Tama na, sobra na, wakasan na ang pamumuno ng pamilyang Duterte. Itigil ang pamamaslang, katarungan ipaglaban.
Para sa apat na magsasaka ng Port Magsaysay, naririnig namin kayo nang igiit ninyong karapatan sa lupang kinakamkam ng reserbasyong militar. At malayang nagbongkal, nagpayaman sa lupang itinitiwangwang lang naman. Subalit, katawan ninyong nabuwal ang ginawa nilang pataba sa lupa.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang. Para kay Father Tito Paez, naririnig ka namin nang isigaw mong, "Pari ako! Pari ako!" Subalit pinaulanan ka pa rin ng bala, ikaw, kasama sila, kayong nagtatanggol lamang sa soberanya, kayong nagtatanggol lamang sa karapatan ng masa.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang. Para kay Joshua Laksamana, nasa iyo ang aming habag sa mga maagang tinapos na buhay, sa mga pangarap na pinutulan ng bukas. Gusto mo lang namang manalo sa Dota para maiuwing panglambing sa ina.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang. Para kay Julio Sebastian, pinagdarasal ka namin, kayong mga di na natagpuan, kayong ipinagkait ng iuwi sa inyong mga tahanan, kayong pwede pa sanang maging tapusan sa mundo.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang. Para kay Joey Torres, organisador ng Bayan Muna, sa halay ng mga magbubukid ng Nueva Ecija, korderong mapagpalaya na inagaw sa mamamayan. Akala ba nilang ang iyong paglaho ay pagtigil ng pakikibaka, gayong buong buhay mong inalay ang buhay. Binuo ang mga tulay para kami makapagpatuloy para sa kagalingan at interes ng bayan.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang. Para kay Joseph Canlas, bayani ng magbubukid, martir ng sambayanan, naririnig namin hanggang ngayon ng dagundong ng boses ninyong nagpangatog sa mga tuhod ng mga Panginoong may lupa. Burokrata at imperialista ikaw, na pinaslang ng kapabayaan at kawalang katarungan.
Hustisya, ang sa inyong mag-aabang para sa humigit kumulang 30,000 pinaslang sa gera kontra droga.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
Para sa humigit kumulang 100,000 kababaihang nabalo at batang naulila.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
Para sa lagpas na sa 1,000,000 individual na dokumentadong biktima ng iba't ibang paglabag sa karapatang pantao.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
Para sa 372 biktima ng extrajudicial na pamamaslang.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
Para sa 488 tangkang pamamaslang.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
Para sa 18 sapintang pagkawala.
Hustisya, ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa 3,876 na pag-aresto at detensyon,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa 3,349 na peking pagpapasurrender,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa halos kalahating milyong mamamayang napilitang lumikas at magbakyot ng maramihan dahil sa operasyong combat at saiwang ng militar,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa daan-daang mga paaralang lumad na ipinasara,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa mga mamamayan ng mga baryong okupado ng militar at arbitraryong pinapatawan ng batas militar,
Hustisya ang sa inyong mag-aabang.
para sa mga aita ng Sambales na pinakain ng tae bago aminin ng Estado na kaso lamang ng mistaken identity,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa pagpaslang sa mag-inang Sonia at Frank Gregorio,
Hustisya ang sa inyong mag-aabang.
para sa mga namatay noong Bloody Sunday ng Timog Katagalugan,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa mga minasakir na mga tumandok sa Tapas Capiz,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y nag-aabang.
para sa mga hiwa-hiwalay na masakir sa Negros,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
para sa Lianga 3,
Hustisya ang sa inyo'y mag-aabang.
at Diyos ng mga aba at tagapagtanggol ng api, Diyos na mahabagin, isasakdal natin sila.
Dahil sa kawalan ng komprehensibo, sistematiko at sayantipikong plano sa gitna ng krisis pang-ekonomiya,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa kriminal at kapabayaan at pag-abuso sa otoridad sa panahon ng pandemya,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa lumulubong 11 trilyong pampublikong utang at sa pagbubulsa ng pera ng bayan,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa kawalang pakialam sa gutom ng sambayanan, sa pagbebenta ng ating mga bundok at karagatan,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa pagsasabotahe sa ekonomiya, sa pagtraidor sa soberanya,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa patuloy na paglaya ng mga gaya ni na Peter Dim at paghahari sa smuggling at bentahan ng ilegal na droga,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa paggamit ng AFP bilang pribadong hukbo, sa pagbabasura sa usapang pangkapayapaan, sa walang patumagang red tagging at terrorist labeling,
Isasakdal natin sila.
sa pagpura sa lahi ng mga Moro at ng pambansang minorya,
Isasakdal natin sila. Kumukulo ang galit ng mamamayan. Manalangin na kayong mga palalo at gahaman. Hustisya ang sa kanila'y nag-aabang. Isasakdal natin sila ngayon at magpasawalang hanggang amin ang pagbawi ng hustisya at katarungan.
Pia, sa napakagandang piyesa. Salamat sa mapanlaban at nanunuot na mensahe. At ngayon ay ating pakinggan ang Unity Statement.
Ito po ay pinirmahan ng 300 mga individuals and organizations mula sa iba't ibang
Forward na. Pursue ICC preliminary investigation. Prosecute Duterte. Victims are stepping forward to express their desire for Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte and others in his administration to be investigated for crimes against humanity.
We stand with them as church people, lawyers, human rights defenders, media practitioners, and other civil society leaders. We also stake our position that accountability for the murders, torture,
and other crimes in connection with the war on drugs is not only in the best interest of survivors, victims and their families desiring justice, but also to the benefit of the entire country.
The widespread and systemic killings in the Philippines were and are instigated,
useful to a fruitful prosecution of the perpetrators of these crimes against humanity.
As we seek to overcome the climate of impunity that has gripped our country, we also seek to create restore, foster, and strengthen justice, democracy, and respect for human rights that our people deserve.
Prosecute Duterte and other perpetrators of the crimes against humanity against the Filipino people.
Forward to the investigation of the ICC. Stop the killings in the PH.
Once again, we thank all our church leaders and members, lawyers, human rights defenders, media practitioners, and other civil society leaders who participated on this virtual prayer and protest.
Ako si Nanay Emily Soriano. Ang aking anak ay si Angelito, 15 years old. Siya ay biktima ng Duterte. Naglilimang taon na kaming nagluluksa at nangungulila sa aking anak. Di kami titigil manawagan para sa hustisya ng aking anak at ng iba pang pamilya ng biktima ng war on drugs. Kami ay kaisa ninyo sa lahat ng laban, hindi lang sa war on drugs. At sa panahon ng aming pagluluksa, kami ay di ninyo iniwan hanggang sa itigil, hanggang nagpapatuloy ang pamilyang Duterte na mamamatay ka. Kami ay lalaban bilang tao para makamit namin ang hustisya.
Itigil ang karahasan! Dayande, 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 dayande. Pakinggan mong mga bulong na mga kulisap sa hangin, animoy nagbabantang may dayuhang parating. Lumipas ang mga araw, binigag din sa karinang dumanak ang mga dugo, pinastang ang lumalaban. Dayande, 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 dayande. Itigil ang karahasan laban sa taong bayan. Wakasan pagsasamantala, ngayon tayo'y magkaisa. Dayandiye, 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 dayandiye. Pakinggan mong mga sigaw ng mga kulisap sa hangin, animoy naglalayong kalaya ay marating. Lumipas ang mga araw, binasag din ang kaninang dumanak ang mga dugo, umiigting ang paglaban. Dayande, dayande, dayande.
Muli po ay maraming salamat sa pagdalo, pagsubaybay, at pakikiisa sa ating gawain ngayon.
Naging matagumpay ang ating gawain. Patuloy na panawagan sa lahat ng ating kababayan na makilahok sa iba pang kampanya para mawakasan ang karahasan at katiwalian sa ating bayan.
Muli po,
kaisa
kami. Forward na pursue ICC investigation, prosecute Duterte, sulong.